Perfect. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our session, Beyond Buzzwords, Boosting Productivity Using Intelligent Automation. So we know that unstructured data is a missing component of many intelligent automation and data analytics initiatives in banking and financial services. Unfortunately, machine learning powered content capture technology can help close the gap for processes and procedures like fraud detection, anomaly detection, pattern analysis, and more. Now, my name is Brandon Campbell. I'm on the business development team at Ephesoft, and I'm personally located in Louisville, Kentucky. My company, Ephesoft, is headquartered in Irvine, California. We've got offices all around the world. At Ephesoft, we focus on intelligent document processing to support context-driven productivity for the enterprise. And with me on the call is Rob Drover.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Drover. I'm Vice President of Business Solutions for Marcum Technology. We're a subsidiary of Marcum LLP, which is an accounting and advisory firm with locations in the United States, China, Grand Cayman, and Ireland. We have about 35 offices in the United States. Marcum Technology is based on Long Island, and I lead the digital advisory practice, of which intelligent automation is one component of that practice area. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, so we thought we'd start with a kind of a little recap of the industry as it kind of relates to artificial intelligence and machine learning. So, you know, really the journey has just begun, but old habits certainly die hard. The age of AI has arrived, in case anyone has missed it. The industry disruptors have blazed a trail for the rest of us. FinTech, InsurTech are sort of modern day digital disruptors. They've challenged the notion that a financial relationship has to be long and involved in-person experience with hundreds of pages of legal documents in unexplainable terms. You know, there's no doubt that the virtual dominance of the smartphone as a communication device of choice has provided these firms with a gateway to a hungry clientele that demands really instant or near instant gratification. You know, whether a person-to-person digital payments is involved, we're talking about refinancing, underwriting in the insurance space, or many other different types of financial transactions, the need to rapidly increase throughput, response time, and accuracy while dealing with a declining workforce is forced to change. According to Business Wire, the global fintech market for AI is expected to grow from about $7 billion to over $23 billion by 2025. Now, terms like fintech were coined to describe technology startups who, unlike their traditional financial services competitors, could start with a clean technology slate with no real restrictions. So they observed those early pioneers of, you know, the sort of the clean app and the flawless user experience, and they set out to develop that latest technology to challenge and upset the traditional apple cart. For every insurtech that gains traction, though, or a financial tech firm, there are hundreds of thousands of more traditional business models that still dominate the market. They've been slow and resistant to change, whether that be through regulatory issues or just internal challenges. What these legacy companies do possess, however, is what we really call sort of the data history or the data gold. It's that, you know, years of buying behavior, buying adoption, cancellation history of their clients. They have years of statistics around campaign success and failure. And that's precisely the information that these new AI-based models depend on. So the data arms race has begun. For every new darling startup in Silicon Valley, there are multi-billion-dollar hedge funds running internal financials still on Microsoft Excel. For the traditionalist, AI is still a foreign concept or part of that rarefied space reserved for data scientists. But for those of you that pay attention to the market and see the new technologies that are coming to the forefront, and you're capable of retooling your infrastructure and your skills, this concept is certainly changing.
So that kind of leads us into why we want to pursue an AI-first approach in the first place, either for those new organizations or for those industry giants that have been around for years. Now, as a concept and as a subset of technology, AI has the potential really to help, I think, with like 3 key organizational goals. One, automating processes, two, generating the insights, and then as a third one, improving the existing methods of work. So in financial services specifically, the expectations are to see efficiency gains, to see improved productivity through implementation of products like RPA systems to help eliminate manual and redundant tasks. We look for improved ROI associated with a lower capital expenditure. We look for gained competitive advantage, like Rob was saying, as a result of data science insights. And last but not least, we're expecting organizations to be able to move from that more reactive mindset, maybe reacting to what they're seeing in their Excel spreadsheets, acting at the whims of consumer trends, to be able to take advantage of that data and move to a more proactive mindset using predictive analytics and other AI-powered tools. But I would say that just broadly swiping at the canvas and pushing AI over all other initiatives, it's not necessarily a recipe for creating a masterpiece. In a Toward Data Science article on Medium, Jan Zawatsky asserted that bad AI strategies are hype-driven, they focus on technology over the actual impact, and that they employ 2 to 3 data scientists who just absolutely scrambled, even trying to find projects to engage in because of a lack of data. So how do we organize and how do we moderate our AI goals in order to set an achievable game plan? I would say first and foremost, why do we care about data as it relates to AI? Basically, it boils down to the fact that without data, there is no AI at all. Now, the most current Kaggle survey on machine learning and data science reported that data scientists spend about 11% of their time simply finding data, and an additional 16% of their time cleansing the data that they found. And regarding the information that these scientists crave, most of that data comes from public sources, which overlooks the internal organizational data that is available, but is often inaccessible. Like Rob mentioned, the years and years and years of consumer financial documents and purchase decisions and client contracts that contribute to what should be part of your available data set, but isn't necessarily accessible or callable from a data science engine. So this means that nearly a third of a data scientist's time is spent on basic tasks, not necessarily the AI model creation, the training, the development, the testing, and the running, all of the tasks that elicit the real results and the benefits of data science. Now, I did a little bit of research, and I thought it was kind of interesting to see how we value data scientists, not only in the financial services industry, but just across the board. So according to Indeed.com, the average salary of a worker in the United States with the title data scientist, this isn't a manager, anyone with like management experience running a team, this is purely a data scientist, which is kind of like the lowest level entry to the data science world, is $121,673 a year. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics cites that the median wage for all workers, and this spans all industries, all positions, blue collar, white collar, across the board, in the United States is $49,764. So the data scientist starting level position is 2.5 times more than any other average position in the country. And so if we look at salary figures alone, it's incredibly clear how important companies deem the ability to elicit insights and predictions on their data sets. So why are we muzzling 30% of the time of a data scientist with like menial tasks like basic data collection? I would also say, what powers digital transformation other than data? McKinsey reported that 70% of all digital transformation initiatives fail, and a majority of RPA project implementations face issues. Certain aspects of behavioral science, let's look at resistance to change, overblown expectations, poor planning, can all be attributed to those failures. But we also see that a lack of usable contextual data can be a major culprit of these statistics. And then last but not least, from just years of personal experience in the industry, document-centric workflows make up the majority of business processes. Documents largely contain unstructured data that need to be manipulated and to be made available to those data scientists and their AI models. And Rob, I'd actually throw it over to you. Obviously, as someone who works on a lot of process automation projects and just does a ton with RPA, how often are you seeing in your average like RPA workflow that we touch on or have to work with some type of documentation just as a part of the process?
Yeah, I mean, documentation or just access to see data to trigger a transaction is pretty much, 100% of the automations. So a lot of the time that we work is really gathering that data into a structured format. Again, you can put an AI model in that can deal with unstructured format, but it's going to take time and it needs to get trained and built up. So when you talk about automation, you're really talking about taking that unstructured data, somehow creating structured data from it, and then having the automation pick it up and run with it, and then it'll, everything will work well. When it has to deal with a tremendous amount of anomalies and exceptions, then you're really defeating the purpose of the automation in the first place.
Yep, that makes sense. It's like trying to hammer in a nail with the butt of a screwdriver, which is something that I do a lot because I often leave my hammer just out of reach, when it would be so much more efficient if I just went and picked up the hammer and used it as the appropriate tool. So yeah, I can appreciate that.
Correct.
All right, so what I want to talk a little bit about is context-driven productivity. Now, I referenced this earlier as a discipline that Ephesoft focuses on, and it's really designed to cultivate the contextual data that's needed to optimize process automation initiatives and to move organizations from a flat and unuseful data focus to contextual data. So we're trying to take a new and innovative approach to acquire data from existing processes and systems, to enrich that data, and then to amplify the value of that data to help increase productivity, which touches on all aspects of an organization, from fraud detection to just improving efficiencies. Now, on the axis of the flat data to the contextual data spectrum that I'm kind of showing here in the screen, and then you have the human-centered workflow approach, the technology-centered workflow approach to business in general. I think that we're sitting kind of somewhere in the middle today. We're stuck at that context wall. So in the technology sphere as a whole, the tools for process automation, the RPA systems, machine learning applications, the deep analysis and data analytics, those have all been created, but they're lacking the right kind of data to truly evolve for peak organizational productivity. And that's what leads us to intelligent document processing. Now, unlike traditional optical character recognition or OCR, intelligent document processing is going to use AI technologies such as machine learning and natural language processing, or NLP as you might have heard it referred to help capture, classify, and extract the most difficult to automate data. This is just one of the tools that should be used to break through that context wall for an organization on their journey from human-centered and a usually outmoded business method to the autonomous enterprise. Now, Rob and I called out a couple of studies and thought leaders and their expressions on the importance of data for all the benefits of AI. Well, intelligent document processing is what's going to refine the fuel of those AI engines, that raw contextual data. So IDP is going to support the automation of manual data extraction and processes, and it's going to make the data useful since, like I've mentioned before, I've thrown out a couple of statistics. The best information I can find is that about 90% of available data for any organization is inaccessible to data scientists. So it's kind of like the same concept of what you have accessible in your brain. You're only using 10% of your brain. What if you could use an additional even 10%? What if you could use an additional 80%? And it's the same concept with data analytics and deep learning. What if you could use all of the information available to you to make decisions? How much more efficient and productive and competitive would your company be? Now, a really common use case that we see across all industries, particularly where trade finance and international banking are concerned, is going to be the need to extract basic header and line item data from invoices, for example, for processing purposes. Now, it's pretty easily digestible use case since we all know what invoices look like. We understand that all invoices are highly different, and since every company and every industry presents their information in a slightly different format, capturing that data is a huge pain, and it's often highly manual. So how do we overcome this first step that kicks off countless AP and procure-to-pay workflows for the accounting department of every single company? We use machine learning powered data capture solutions, as in the IDP category that I just kind of covered, in order to lower cost, in order to create operational efficiencies across the enterprise. Now, as it relates to financial services and banking specifically, Trade-based money laundering, it's a thorn in the side of all major international banks. It's the reason that companies spend dozens of billions of dollars on anti-money laundering or AML policies, activities, and compliance every year. Now, when I was doing some research for this presentation and kind of diving into anti-money laundering a little bit, I genuinely could not believe that this number represented the AML spend for the United States and Canada alone. So that's according to a 2019 LexisNexis study. Financial institutions in the US and Canada exclusively are spending $31.5 billion for compliance. And the number globally surpasses that by dozens and dozens and dozens of billions. It's a huge spend, not only from a capital expenditure perspective, but also from the amount of money being spent on labor to actually support this mission. But with AI-powered technology, there are so many ways that we can minimize not only risk and decrease the cost of compliance, but we can do so while improving manual processes for key accounting and auditing teams. Thanks to so many innovations in the world of unstructured data analysis and extraction, it's becoming possible to take trade-related documents and records like invoices, like purchase orders, like bills of lading, and output structured data sets. And when you remove the human element to these audit and compliance processes, you're going to be improving efficiency and you're going to be helping to highlight suspicious activities. Now, some good examples of this where invoices specifically are key are catching carousel transactions, which are the repeated importation and exportation of the same high value commodity. Identifying instances of over or under invoicing, and doing so by taking a line item from an invoice and comparing it to a standardized or normalized price that you have for your industry to determine whether or not a price is being largely inflated or deflated, which could be a flag for fraud. Being able to compare invoice line items with existing business contracts. Is one department of your organization paying $10 per unit and another department of your organization is only paying $1? Where's the difference there? Not only for purposes of identifying areas where you could get additional discounts from a vendor, but also to see if there's some type of fraudulent transaction there. Ordering these details through a semantic engine to determine the validity of a purchase. Why is a human resources department ordering, I don't know, 10 units of steel, for example, as a very, very poor example. And then finally, just being able to flag double invoicing. All of these are activities that could be taken by an RPA system who's going to check against things like double invoicing to compare against third-party data sources or to compare against an ERP system, or for an analytics engine to run that raw data through a predictive model. But again, without the data present in the first place, you can't run those models, you can't take those actions. And actually gathering all that data, if you're a large organization dealing with hundreds and hundreds or millions of invoices every single year, where does that information come from?
And Brandon, I'd like to just jump in here for one moment.
Please, yes.
As it relates to just a simple use case like invoicing, a tremendous amount of an organization's time is spent really on that capture and extract portion of the process, and so the resources tend to be highly consumed with that activity, even just including approval. But if you think about approving an invoice, you're approving one version of an invoice, and there could be multiple versions coming through to different approvers, so there's no linkage between the two. But my point here is that we probably spend 90% of our resources on simply capturing it, extracting it, and pushing it forward for payment, as opposed to truly analyzing it. So all the points you mentioned about looking for, whether it be fraud or just good source to pay processes, you can't do it when your staff is tied up. So if we can move those people from being essentially clerical workers up to become what we call knowledge workers. So those are people that are actually using their skills, their abilities, and their experience to derive, decisions, concepts, and strategies out of the data that they're viewing. That's a tremendous leap in terms of productivity.
Oh, absolutely. I see that quite often, and I'm sure that's something that you encounter a lot when you get into your automation projects. Is it's a component of change management. How do you upskill workers or take advantage of the skills that workers have with the time that they're spending doing menial tasks, doing that data entry, duplicate entering of, again, for example, invoices, the data in their ERP system, in the general ledger, updating various different systems all at the same time because they got one single invoice. So if we can eliminate all of that, there's huge potential for that upskill. And a lot of that comes down to change management at the organizational level too, which I know you're kind of going to get into a little bit later when you talk about what changes when you go with an AI first approach.
Right, and just one other point, just outside of invoicing, you look at underwriting, for example, whether it be in the loan space in banking or in insurance. Again, a very tedious process of collecting a whole series of documentation from the prospective client. Again, do you want your loan underwriters to be processing paperwork, or would you like them to be developing more sophisticated models to underwrite a loan much quicker and beat out your competition? So again, you see these fintech startups that are offering, instant decisions on loans versus the traditional sort of, multi-day, multi-week process. Again, that's generated from moving people up to that knowledge worker level.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so I'd love to actually illustrate some of these use cases. I'm going to hop into a demonstration where I'm going to show a product called Ephesoft Semantic. It's a cloud-based platform that uses a pre-trained machine learning model to extract data and entities from invoices, since that's what we've been talking about, to support the mission of anti-money laundering and other aspects of AP and procure to pay and all the things associated in the world of accounting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my browser and I'm going to log into my tenant of Semantic. So bear with me while I type here. And again, this is my email address. If anyone has any questions, that'll be in the slide deck too. All right, so once I've logged in, what I'm gonna be presented with is a dashboard. That's basically just gonna give me a quick overview of documents that are ready to be processed by me or claimed by me. So in this case, what I've done is I've sent some invoices via email to the tenant. It's kind of automating or replicating what the process would be of vendors sending their invoices via email to your accounting team. So if I select claim invoices, what's going to happen is I'm going to have a list of invoices and previews of these invoices opened up for my review. And something important to note here before I kind of get into an overview of what you're looking at is that this is a point solution, meaning you don't have to train the system for how to interact with the content or what type of information you're looking for. Something that Rob mentioned earlier is one of the challenges you'll see with automation projects is that if you don't have a model, if you don't have an endpoint or a machine learning model where it's already trained to capture data from an unstructured document or capture data from any other piece of unstructured content, you're probably spending a lot of time trying to develop that model or train the model or give the model enough content to be able to understand how to interact with the content. This is a pre-trained model, so there's no upfront work required. You can simply plug and play so that the data becomes available to you from day one. So what I have here on the left-hand side of the screen are just a list of the documents that need review. In the middle of the screen here is a sample image of the document that was being processed. And then on the right-hand side, I have, basically I have the fields that were extracted from this particular document. Now, for the purpose of this demonstration, every single invoice is going to stop in this review screen because we want to show what's actually being extracted from this information or from this particular document. But if you want to have a basically a no human interaction process, and you simply want to export the data back into the system of record, back into an analytics engine, back into an RPA system without having to stop at this human review, and you're happy with the confidence scores, you can set those flag parameters to automatically go back to wherever they need to be without having to have that interaction. So if you're happy with the 98% confidence threshold, then you can go straight through processing. So as I click through the fields here, they're going to be highlighted in this preview pane of the screen. If there's a field that wasn't captured, odds are it wasn't captured because it does not exist on this document. So we can limit what we're looking for on the document, but out of the box, there's a couple dozen, I believe, or maybe about 24 different header fields that we're automatically going to look for, in addition to the line items as well. So there's no customer ID in this document, which is why we get that 0% confidence threshold. But if I scroll through here, I can see what was or wasn't as extracted. Now, something that's really important and something that I definitely want to call out here is how we're going to deal with the actual line items that we find on this document. So when I was talking about during the actual presentation, I was covering slides earlier, how important it is to be able to pull out line item information from invoices because of things like looking for carousel transactions and over and under invoicing. This type of detail is where you're going to get the data insights, not only on spending trends, not only on the way that companies interact with their vendors, but this is where you're going to find the real insights. And this is going to be the most challenging thing for any AI engine to grab. And if you're not using an AI engine and you're just thinking, well, I only need to grab 10 fields from every invoice, it only takes me a couple minutes per invoice to manually key them in, then you're missing out on so much data that could be available to help detect fraudulent transactions, to help detect areas where discounts could be made or more aggressive terms could be met. And so being able to look at an invoice, being able to take an AI model of how we grab variable tables to pull out this information is so incredibly valuable. And if I click through on some of these other invoices here, we can see that they're all going to be pretty wildly different. Oops, I'm clicking on the wrong side here. They're all going to be pretty wildly different, but regardless of how different this information is laid out, regardless of different type of detail that's been made available here, I'm still able to grab this type of line item detail to make that available for the data scientists. And I think this is going to be one of the most powerful and beneficial aspects of a tool like this, when you could take advantage of something that's not just going to grab basic entities, but that's going to pull out some of the information that's going to support the ability to make those, I would say, semantic calls, or the semantic analysis on what type of purchase I'm making and if that relates to the existing customer contract that I have in place. So
one other thing, Brandon, just real quick,
yes.
just on a very basic accounting side, this would also, of course, facilitate the three-way matching process. So if you have a purchase order system and you're matching at a line item detail level, then as you know, you have to extract line item detail. And traditionally, that's been a very tedious manual process in order to extract all that and match the quantities and the product codes and so on.
Oh, absolutely. That's something that we hear very often, the ability to perform that three-way matching. And that's something that, while you could facilitate with an RPA system, with an integration hub, I mean, there are so many tools readily available that have the ability to perform that automatically. But again, without the data, how do you perform that? So I think that's a huge power of this application. Now, there's a couple of other things I wanted to point out here. So if I'm happy with the invoice and everything that's been processed, I could simply select complete review, and then it's going to take me on to the next document that needs processing here. While I'm looking at this, something I wanted to call out within the settings tab here at the top hand corner of the screen is how easy it is to be able to configure an interaction with third-party systems. This is something that I would highlight as a reason why companies like Marcum Technology, why organizations that have the ability to perform business consulting services and can look at an existing technology and make recommendations on how things need to be integrated or how things need to be tied together are so important. And we're trying to develop the tools to support that. So, for example, in the export setup, in this case, what we could do is we could simply connect to a third-party system, whether it's an RPA system, a business process management tool, an integrator hub. We can do so by simply configuring a webhook where we call a webhook from that third-party application, enter the details, and allow that information to flow the minute that the invoice is processed. So it's real-time processing, you're not processing in batch, and that application can get the information back pretty darn immediately. So just a couple of things to call out and highlight there is just the ease with which we can integrate and work with third-party applications. And I would say really the power of, like I said, companies like Marcum that can help support that, basically that process identification and help make those best practices recommendations. All right, so I'm going to hop back over into the slideshow, and I want to move on a little bit because I know that Rob has some really great content to talk to when it comes to his experience in creating efficiencies and some other use cases for AI and financial services as a whole.
All right, so my background is in process improvement, and I've been doing that since my early days of my career as a staff accountant. I, like many of you, probably get frustrated with a repetitive process, and so tools like AI, RPA, machine learning, all of these different technologies have been a tremendous boon to the concept of process improvement, and I think that's something we should all keep in mind as we move forward. That's really what it's all about: is creating new efficiencies, allowing an organization to increase capacity, to more dynamically react to the market. Obviously, in the situation with COVID that we're going through right now, those organizations that can pivot quickly and generate new lines of business and new services are going to be the most successful. So, what are what can we do to create efficiencies? Well, there's many barriers to access, but there's lots of help on the horizon here. So, firms can take these new technologies and really synthesize larger volumes of data faster than their competitors, right? So, how fast can we ingest, classify, extract, and then act on the data that we have? In our business today, for example, in the accounting and advisory business, our clients are spending considerable sums of money with us extracting data from bank and credit card statements. That could be for litigation purposes, contractual business issues, or even matrimonial disputes for high net worth individuals. So again, there's a lot of money being spent trying to access the data. AI and ML can certainly help increase that efficiency. For example, we have a client today that uses Ephesoft's Transact product, and they pull data from their clients' 401k statements to help with compliance reporting. So again, what was previously a manual task has been converted into more of an automated machine learning style task in order to cut down on both on time and efficiency, improve efficiency, and also to improve compliance within their operation. The next step really is taking that contextual and cross-platform analysis. So being able to look out at other sources of information, and as Brandon mentioned it earlier, going from a flat document to more of a three-dimensional document and pulling in information. While many of the mainstream financial organizations still control a significant slice of that data flow, the barriers are coming down, and using automation approaches are helping us aggregate data from various different sources. So we're no longer dependent on one data source. For example, for one financial institution, our clients may have information in multiple areas. Another area that I think helps create efficiencies is working in the back office, and a lot of those advancements in the back office are being held back by a number of factors. So ineffective data management, weak or non-existent process improvement philosophies, something that I believe in wholeheartedly. There's a lack of technology awareness just around the rank and file. So while we're here today talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, I would argue that many organizations, the vast majority of people, would have trouble telling you what a macro is in Excel or what a pivot table is, which is a huge skills gap that we need to deal with. There's an aging demographic in the workforce, and certain age ranges are going to have been exposed to different technologies, and they're going to be slower to change. New graduates coming out of university today are highly focused on sort of automated and low-touch solutions, and they're chomping at the bit to get after these new technologies. And what we don't want to do is saddle them with old and out-of-date processes. Automation is often a second or a third mindset within an organization. So when that's the case, what typically happens is organizations focus on the common day-to-day activities, and they're not focusing on that automation mindset. And I would argue you need to flip that around completely and really focus on how do we automate first, and then we'll sort of deal with the ongoing operations second. as the pace of these AI tools and the release of these tools become more accessible, the ability to create automation efficiencies is just jumping up dramatically. And the ability and the cost and the barrier to entry is coming down as well. So again, 2 years ago, you might have needed a data science department internally. Today, you can create an online data model with your credit card and get exposed to the technology. And then if you decide to implement it in any scale, then you can bring those data science resources in, and you've already got a program in place. So the ability to bring these models on board quickly and efficiently is certainly increased. And a lot of for example, the RPA platforms today are now building in these technologies within their platform to allow you to essentially plug and play a model like Symantec, which Brandon just went over, within minutes. So literally you could be up and running on an AP automation, within a day, and plug that right into your RPA workflow, for example, and really speed up the adoption and the intake of documents and data. All right, why don't we move on to the next slide? Sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think that's a really good point to make. I mean, even 2 years ago, you would look at an organization that was kind of on the cusp of starting a digital transformation project, and they'd have maybe like a 5-year outline for how long it was going to take them to overhaul these efforts and processes. And I think what we're seeing today is that the availability of point solutions, the availability of some things that are available in open source, there are so many tools that are now readily available to address very specific processes. There's a way to achieve much quicker, I think, results and a much quicker time to production than what we've seen historically when we undertake large IT initiatives. So I think that's just an interesting shift in what's become available and how quickly the technology is developing.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue if someone came to me tomorrow and said, we're looking at a 5-year plan to sort of, do that digital transformation, I'd say you're about 4 years,
Yep.
too long. The technology will be unrecognizable by the time 5 years comes. So hence the reason many of the tools and technologies now are more SaaS-based, annual license fees, et cetera, because this idea of buying a platform for 5 years and amortizing the cost over the term just doesn't make sense anymore.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
All right, why don't we move on to a sort of a specific example in our industry that has some relevance, I think, to the audience. And that's around the idea of forensic accounting and how AI and machine learning and other technologies can be used in that area. So again, we've come far in this area. Game's not over. A common use case that we see every day, we'll have cases brought to us that involve a significant amount of asset tracing. In other words, determining the flow of money and where it's gone from entity to entity. You can imagine many individuals, investors, corporations have hundreds of legal entities that they operate under. Even a high net worth individual might have 50 or 100 legal entities that they own. Dollars can travel back and forth between those entities, and it gets very confusing and complicated to do that tracing. Many forms of financial fraud, and we'll represent both government interests, and also we can represent individual and corporate interests that are being perhaps brought to litigation by the government. We're going to have to look at the books and records of those organizations and try to sort through, hundreds and thousands of pages of financial information. We also get involved with what we call lifestyle analysis during a marital dissolution or a divorce. We're looking for sources of funds. We're looking for uses of funds, whether to establish a quote unquote lifestyle amount or just to, look for any fraud or hiding of resources. So all these things traditionally would take, somebody to ingest financial statements, bank statements, et cetera, extract the information from them using a variety of techniques, and then do the analysis. There's certainly been a number of changes, and as we look at new concepts around contextual mapping and going out and getting other sources of information, for example, entity relationships between organizations, being able to do automated data extraction, this idea of sourcing individual bank statements from hundreds of different bank accounts, I believe, may be nearing its end. There are many aggregation services today that allow us to, aggregate our financial life in one place. For example, there's tools like Mint with Intuit, where you can basically load up all your accounts, all your different statements in one sort of holistic viewpoint. Well, now that those organizations have got that data, the ability for them to unlock it on your behalf with your approval, and then provide that to your accountant or to your forensic analyst or to your bank to do your underwriting review. Wouldn't that be a tremendous advantage if you could just say, yes, go ahead and release my whole portfolio in a digital format that's easily consumable by an AI model? Things like distributed ledgers that are going to be built on blockchain. This idea of not really having to audit either side of a transaction because the entire transaction is represented on the blockchain is going to make a tremendous advancement for us in this whole area of forensic accounting down the road. And I think what's really going to drive it is the pressure that we're going to get from our clients on the rates that we all have to charge as professional services firms in order to do this detailed digging and analysis through data that, quite frankly, is out there. It just needs to be accessible in a way that makes sense. So if we switch to the next slide, I've got a sort of an example here, sort of a graphical example of where I think we kind of are today and where we're going to go in the next slide. So today, we're typically gathering bank statements, financial statements, credit card statements. Depending on whether it's a litigation project or whether it's direct from the client, what we might get is secondhand data. So we might get scans of original data. We might get, poor quality faxes. So there's lots of challenges with the source data. And I think we all need to push to improve that mindset that says, let's get away from faxing and let's get away from, if the other side of the other party wants to give you bad data because they think it's just going to slow things down, quite frankly, it's costing both sides extra money. So improving the quality of the actual source data is one thing. We're using machine learning engines today to do that classification and extraction, but we're essentially doing a one-dimensional pull of that data. So it's flat. It's whatever's on the page is what we're extracting. We're not really going out to any other sources to validate it. We're simply putting that into a database repository, whether that be, again, a database, a SharePoint portal, an Excel spreadsheet, to make it visual and visible and usable to the analyst. And then finally, we're turning that over to forensic accountants to be able to go through and do the data tracing and do all the complicated tests. And obviously that's still a fairly manual intensive process that requires a certain amount of labor. Go ahead, Brandon. So then the second area where I think we're moving is more of a contextual extraction approach. So the machine learning model, similar to the semantic model that Brandon showed earlier, is going to do that. First of all, it's going to do that flat extraction. So it's going to pull the data off the invoice, the bank statement, and so on. But it's then going to go to a third-party data source, and it's going to validate that. Or it's going to skip that task entirely if it has enough information just from what we feed in. So for example, if we fed in the organizational structure of a high net worth individual's ownership holdings in a variety of companies, and through a variety of third-party pulls, we're able to generate a whole map of their financial investments. Or we can enter the person's name or the corporation's name. And again, these third-party sources have tremendous amounts of information out there. We pull all that in, and then we create what's called a knowledge graph, which is very, very simply a summation of all the different data sources that we've researched, and we present that in a way that it makes it much quicker to do the analysis. And perhaps, quite frankly, through the machine learning and the AI concepts, we can actually do a lot of that fraud analysis that Brandon spoke about earlier and present theories and hypotheses and other recommendations to the analyst so that they're already 3/4 of the way into their work. And that can cut down on the number of resources required and, of course, the cost involved. So you can see where we're moving in terms of going from flat data to more three-dimensional data and being able to do calculations, to be able to do predictive analytics on where fraud may have occurred, to be able to match up financial transactions not only between bank accounts, but between legal entities and their separate bank accounts. That gets very complex, and that's something that a machine learning or an AI model can begin to accomplish for you. All right, over to you, Brandon.
I think that's something worth noting about this is that we've kind of covered, two very specific use cases, and, or I mean, you covered a couple on the last slide. We covered specific use cases in financial services, whether it comes to, you know, fraud detection and pattern detection and all of that. I think it's worthwhile to consider as well, outside of this, you know, narrow focus, where these tools can be applied once implemented to other areas of your organization as well, whether it's onboarding for human resources and doing security vetting and background checks. It's all the same types of principles, and having to do that third-party vetting and that data validation and pulling together information from a variety of sources. Just the raw step of gathering all of that information to make it available for the purposes of analysis, I mean, it crosses every single vertical and industry across the board. And by, you know, starting this out with one process, with one use case, I think you're kind of building yourself up to be able to knock down the rest of your bricks at the digital transformation journey for your organization as a whole.
And one other thing I'd like to just throw in there as an example of a use case. So again, we're in the professional services business and part of an accounting and audit firm. We do what's called a conflict check process. So we have to make sure from an independent standpoint that any work we do is independent of an audit, for example. Or if we're doing a litigation project, we want to make sure that we're not representing both sides of the litigation. That's also a very common process in the legal profession, these so-called conflict checks. So this idea of feeding in a prospective client's name and all their officers within that company. Today we have to go sort of, you know, often go manually do research on the different entities that they're involved in to make sure that there are no conflicts. A contextual data extraction process could take those names and go off to a variety of different sources and create, you know, a sort of an entity map of where they have influencers and where they have financial interests, and that could be, you know, dramatically helpful in the conflict process. Another area that's relevant for banking is the know your customer process, which is very important. So when they're taking on a new customer, this ability to be able to not only just read the documentation provided by the prospective client, but to be able to go out and proactively check relationships and really understand where that client is coming from, where their sources of funding come from, and to meet a lot of the compliance standards in the banking industry.
Yep, I hear KYC thrown about quite a bit when you start getting into AI and financial services. So good point on that one.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about how you can develop an AI strategy for your business. And what we've tried to do here is just give some simple points and elaborate on those a little bit. But I think really the number one thing is to identify what your business goals are and make sure that this strategy is aligned. You know, AI is not a catch-all or solution for everything. I think when you're looking at those business goals, make sure you're looking at areas that AI and machine learning can actually benefit and contribute to. So, for example, increased revenue, client retention, you know, improving your bottom line through expense reduction, improving market share. Make sure that there's a mapping between what you're going to try to accomplish as you develop this strategy and those top line goals. So you should constantly be reviewing that and making sure that you're aligned and you're not off just doing a tech project for the sake of it or because it's a cool technology. If it doesn't match back to your business goals, then it's going to be misaligned, it's not going to get funded, and it's not ultimately going to succeed. You want to make sure that you define those successful customer behaviors and outcomes that actually align with that success. So, for example, if you're in the, you know, in the cable TV business, you want to cut down on churn. You want to reduce the number of times that you're losing and gaining clients. You want to keep them for a longer period of time. Increase contract duration. Improve and increase the average contract value. You know, all of those things are going to have direct impacts on your business goals, and those are things that an AI model can actually, you know, predict and also can help evaluate data and give you, you know, options for moving forward. As it relates to internal efficiency, you want to focus on those sort of highest cost internal functions, highest cost and probably highest transactional type functions. So probably things that are customer facing versus purely in the back office. Those functions that have the most influence on revenue. And revenue can both be, what you sell, but it can also be what you collect. So the speed at which you collect the cash and bring it in, or the amount of time that you hold the cash, all of those things can affect your results. You want to develop a hypothesis and base that on your initial data and your experience. So what do you think you're going to get out of this AI strategy? What do you think is going to come out of the model in the first place? And that helps you guide the design of your model. You want to look at your data quality, the quantity, the quality, the substance, and make sure that it has the information that you're ultimately going to need to be able to train these models. You want to be able to digitize and enrich your data and make sure that you can access it in the first place. And that's where some of these platforms come into play. And you want to be able to recreate or significantly enhance those business processes to leverage the AI technology. So do you want to re-engineer what you're doing today, or do you want to start greenfield and create a new project group or strategy to go after a process in a whole new way, driven by AI first, or automation first, as we discussed earlier? And certainly you want to educate, engage, and support these change agents within your organization. You want to create a center of excellence. Make sure that you increase education, you increase incentives to stimulate entrepreneurial thinking and action within the organization. One of the reasons that a fintech or an insurtech or these other startups see, rapid success is often because they challenge these conventional norms. So they break the rules a little bit internally. They challenge an existing norm in a marketplace. And while everybody thinks it's shocking to begin with, lo and behold, and certainly an Uber is a great example of that, right? Challenging the taxi industry. They were able to sort of go out and, despite the fact that no one thought they could do it, change the transportation industry dramatically. So, you need to be able to challenge that internally and create an entrepreneurial spirit within your organization and make sure you reward your employees appropriately.
Thanks, Rob. I think that's a really good point that we often overlook when we're, working with organizations, to reward the challenger mentality. And I see that a lot. So we have time. I think we have just a couple of minutes here for a few questions. So I'm going to read them out, and then Rob, you and I can tackle them from there. So first question is, what recommendations would you make to a client who's trying to incorporate AI into their business strategies as a total newbie? Is there a specific process or a department that we should start with?
I would say, again, make sure that that the identified need aligns with the corporate goals, right? So that's number one. And then I would look for a process that's data rich, or that data goal that we referred to, and it has some transaction volume, because those are both critical success factors. And I think we mentioned that numerous times. An AI model is nothing without data, and it's nothing without experience. So probably don't go into a process that you really haven't done before and you haven't gotten the experience in, because you're not going to have a lot of data, and it's going to take a long time for that model to actually start generating value, and you're going to get frustrated with it, and it's not going to be a good first step. So pick a process that has a lot of data, and it has some reasonable transaction volume, so that you can start to see the success of that model after you implement it.
I would probably add to that, look for a process, look for a project where you can get a quick win. There's nothing like starting a new engagement. Like, I think about that when I clean the house. Do I want to wax the floors first, or do I want to wipe down the counters? Like, what's going to give me the best hit of, okay, I was able to finish and accomplish a task? Is it just a way to not only engender confidence in this new strategy that you're embarking on as a company, but also to gain employee support and to boost morale? I find that goes a long way when we look at overall just resistance to change within an organization. All right, so we've got another question here. Do you see any ROI in purchasing AI technology for compliance, or is it all just about disaster prevention?
No, absolutely. I think there's an ROI. With compliance, it's not just about staying out of trouble. There's many benefits from being a compliant organization, meeting all of the ethical and legal and other standards that are out there. I mean, we're in a hypersensitive environment right now, and as we've seen with many organizations, whether that be missteps on social media or other issues that affect their reputational risk, the cost can be enormous. So just implementing a good compliance structure, and AI technology can help with that, whether that's around predicting issues, being able to go out and monitor that reputational risk in the social realm to make sure that the information that's being published about you and your organization is accurate and correct. There's many different activities that can be done with it, and I think while it may not have a direct impact on revenue or expense tomorrow, that cost of your reputational risk, when and if it happens, will more than pay for the cost of the technology.
Well, I mean, I think you called that out earlier, Rob. You were talking about like onboarding new customers or doing underwriting. Like, yes, there is a huge factor of mitigating risk when you're taking on a new client, when you're reviewing the financial background of an individual or of a client or a company. For sure, there's a ton that has to do with compliance there, whether it's looking at KYC or AML, or it's just new customer onboarding. But something that you called out earlier was, how much of a competitive advantage do you get by being able to review and onboard and approve that new client before your competitor? Being able to speed up transactions is going to help with revenue generation. And then you're also just looking at, like you talked about, like upcycling employees. So new skills training for individuals that can actually take advantage of, I can't remember what you called it, higher skilled employees.
Knowledge workers.
The knowledge workers, creating the knowledge workers. There's absolutely ROI to that. And I think it's something that you can probably quantify beyond just that, disaster avoidance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I think we have time for probably one more question here. All right. So if we didn't get to your questions, I apologize. We will follow up after the fact. So submit questions via email. I've got, with so many open source tools and algorithms available, we're considering building our own AI tools for some of the use cases you talked through. Any recommendations as we start down that path?
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, and you mentioned, starting simple. I would recommend that you dedicate a team that has time to set aside to first of all, they're going to need some training. This is not a technology for the faint of heart, but there's lots and lots of resources available out there, and it's not all, at a high cost. There's lots of low cost training available. So dedicate a team, doesn't have to be 100% of their time, but they need to have time set aside, because otherwise, as I mentioned near the beginning, what typically happens is the day job just takes over, and these become the second and third priorities, and we all know what happens there. Nothing ever gets done. So whether it be 25 or 50% of a small sub team's time to set aside, and develop essentially a proof of concept. So come up with that hypothesis that we talked about. Maybe it's related to, why do certain customers leave? Why do they drop their subscriptions? And if you have that historical data volume and data to support, and to show, okay, these are the customers that have left and dropped their subscription over the past 5 years, and you have a whole bunch of information about them. Within a few hours, quite frankly, with some of the tools today, you could create your own ML model that does a prediction as to when the next customer is going to drop their subscription based on their certain characteristics and how they match up with the history that you've imported into the model. So there's lots of ways and lots of tools out there to do those proof of concepts, but I think you have to have that dedicated team that can actually sort of, learn it a little bit and be able to articulate the pros and cons of what they've built.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I hear a lot of buzz around the build versus buy debate, and what makes sense for an organization that has like a well-staffed IT team that could be able to dedicate the resources versus someone who might just be trying to dabble in it and possibly try to save some money. I I would caution anyone considering going down the build route to really do their due diligence and to do the cost analysis when considering whether to spend the time doing the development work versus potentially buying something that's like, or subscribing to something that's a COT solution or a commercially off-the-shelf technology, I think is what that stands for,
Yep.
with a subscription model, because there are so many tools available to be consumed on the cloud, low risk, hosted subscription model to take advantage of without having to reinvent the wheel. So if you have the data sets and you have the data scientists and you want to build your own AI models, or you have the tools to create this machine learning endpoint, then that is absolutely fantastic. And we absolutely encourage that. But I would say, look at available technology to help subsidize that or to support that or to augment that, so that you're not creating everything from scratch, because it doesn't necessarily make sense when it comes to having to support and update and worry about integration support for third-party applications that you might have to pull for. There are companies that are already doing that, and it's more often than not less expensive just to be able to subscribe to something in addition to what you're currently developing. So I would caution looking at like a hybrid approach if that's what you're considering. Anything to add to that, Rob?
No, I think certainly that's a great way to learn too, is to be able to go out and essentially purchase, or it's almost like leasing. You're going to lease a model for a while, and you're going to get comfortable with it and develop some experience, and then you can make that decision whether you want to invest further and create your own, modify existing ones, or so on. But there's enough starting material out there, I think, that can leapfrog you into this area quite quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar on intelligent automation for boosting productivity in financial services. If we weren't able to get to your question, please do feel free to email us, check out our websites listed below, and reach out with questions. We're more than happy to engage and to hear your feedback. Rob?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Brandon. It was a pleasure working with you, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar, and we look forward to interacting with you in the very near future.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye-bye now.